Let's take a look at the amazing structure of the eyeball. First thing we should talk about is that the eye, broadly speaking, has three coats associated with it. What are these coats? Well, we term these the outer coat, the middle coat, and the inner coat. So what I want to do is take a look at these three coats and begin with the outer coat. So unsurprisingly, the outer coat begins with the outside of the eyeball. And if we take a look at the outer coat of the eye, we can draw it up like this. So what I've drawn right now is one aspect of the outer coat. This is what we call the sclera. So the outer coat is made up of the sclera, that's the first part, and this makes up around about 93%, and I'll write it over here, about 93% of the surface of the eyeball. And then it's also made up of the cornea, which I'm going to put in a different colour. And the cornea makes up around about 7% of the eye surface, of the eyeball surface. So some important points. When we look at the sclera, it is opaque in colour. When you look at the eye and you see the white part of the eye, that is the sclera. It's opaque. When you look at the cornea, it is transparent. So let's write this down. The sclera is opaque. The cornea is transparent. Now this is important. This is important because when we want light to go into the eye, we want this light to go through the cornea. We do not want it to go through the sclera because we need to focus that light for us to become aware of what we're seeing and get the best image we possibly can. So the cornea is transparent, the sclera is not. The sclera is also very smooth because it contains attachments for muscles that allow, what we call extraocular muscles that allow for the eyeball to move, but also has holes in it for blood vessels. Now the type of tissue it's made out of is epithelia. In actual fact, both the sclera and the cornea is made up of epithelial tissue. So this is the outer coat, right? Let's now take a look at the middle coat. So the middle coat is highly vascularized. So it's very vascular, that's referring to blood vessels, right? And it's there for nutritive purposes. It's there to provide nutrition through that vascularity. So the middle coat is quite vascular. And it's there for nutrition. Now I didn't say what the outer coat was there for, I should highlight that. The outer coat is actually there for protection. It's made up of epithelia and it's there to protect the inner aspects of the eye. Here, in the middle coat, nutrition is going to be the function of the anatomy of the middle coat. So let's draw it up. Let's draw up this vascular layer here. So the vascular layer begins at around about here and it goes all the way around. All the way to here. Now an interesting point is it actually thickens as you get more towards the anterior aspect of the eyeball. It thickens. We can colour that in. Now why is it thickening? Well, by the time we hit that cornea aspect, it's the thickest part it could possibly be. Let's finish colouring this in first. And what we call this entire red layer that we've got here, this entire blood supply filled layer, is the choroid. And where it thickens up here, this is called the ciliary body. And the ciliary body has muscles associated with it, which is very important because these muscles attach to ligaments that hang off it like that. And what do these ligaments attach to? They attach to a lens. This is the lens. What does the lens do? It focuses light. Focus light. Because obviously light's going to be moving through the cornea and through the lens, and the lens can focus it. Now, these ligaments that are here, these ligaments are important. They're called ciliary ligaments. Ciliary ligaments. And through the muscles of the ciliary body that are located all within here, if those muscles contract, they can pull on those ciliary ligaments and they can change the lens. They can make it thinner, they can make it fatter, and that alters the way the light can be focused. Really important, alters the way the light can be focused. But we haven't finished with the ciliary body because it has another extension of the ciliary body that comes out to here. This extension, interestingly, is called the iris, also known as the diaphragm. So what do you think this does? Well, it can change the amount of light that it lets through. So while the lens focuses the light, the iris can change how much light gets through. And you can see, if you look in somebody's eye, that black dot that you see right in the middle, that's the iris. That's this thing here. And you can change how large and small that iris is. Hence why it's called a diaphragm, changing its size, how much light it lets in. So that's an important point. Another important point that we forgot to refer to with the outer coat is that at the boundary of the cornea and the sclera, so right here, the boundary of the cornea and the sclera, you actually have stem cells. This area here is called the limbus, and it contains stem cells. Now why? Because if you scratch the cornea or damage the cornea, it can't regenerate itself. So it needs a new population of epithelia, which comes from the limbus, comes from the stem cells that are present at the limbus. Very important. All right, so we've spoken about the outer coat and we've spoken about the middle coat. Let's now talk about the inner coat. The inner coat is also known as the retina. And it's actually made up of two coats itself. So the coats are the outer coat. I know you're thinking, wait, we're in the inner coat. What's the outer coat of the inner coat? Isn't that wonderful to hear? The outer coat is actually also known as the pigment. And the inner coat is also known as the neural layer. So you've got of the inner coat, you've got the pigment layer and the neural layer. Let's have a look at the pigment layer. Let's make it brown. And this is, like an example of this is melanin, right? Melanin is a pigment. And so the pigment layer, again, inner, so it's going to be even more inner than this vascular layer. The pigment layer goes all the way around like this. It actually goes all the way around to the iris as well. And this is why the iris looks black, because of this pigment layer. When you look at the iris, it looks black. And when you look into the eye, it looks black because of this pigment layer. And then the last layer here is, the most inner, is the neural layer. And this neural layer actually only goes to around about here. Now it's the neural layer that contains the photosensitive cells. Neural layer has the photosensitive cells, so the rods and the cones. This is how we pick up and transduce a light signal into an electrical signal for our brain to become aware of it. And it's important because it highlights that only here can you pick up an image. You cannot pick up an image anywhere else but here. Light must hit this area for an image to be seen. Really important. Now, the last thing is the fluid that's inside. There's actually fluid inside. There's all fluid floating through here. And this fluid is called vitreous. Vitreous fluid. And then there's fluid in here, in this posterior chamber and this anterior chamber here. And this is called the aqueous humor. Aqueous humor. So there's two lots of this fluid, right? There's the vitreous humor or vitreous fluid and the aqueous humor or aqueous fluid. They're basically just made up of water and electrolytes. And so what we've just highlighted is the basic anatomy and a little bit about the physiology of the eye.